Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you may be in the world. Once again, this is Nick Banks with the latest review for you from All Things PlayStation 4, all about Battlefield 1. So, same as usual, I picked up Battlefield 1 on release day, tried to get through the multiplayer and the campaign as quickly as I could for you guys so I could bring the review. Sorry it is a little bit late, but I wanted to ensure that I had a good full understanding of everything the game had to offer. And I've got to admit, when things started out, I sat down and I thought, yeah, here we go, here's another military shooter, it's going to be the same as all the rest of them. To a degree, it's not really the same as all the rest of them for obvious reasons, it being World War I, which is a topic not very much explored by the rest of the games industry. But oddly, the game does somehow have its own sense of charm. To a degree, I knew exactly what to expect, what I was getting into, although it's fair to say that EA DICE have refined this iteration of Battlefield down to a fine sheen. Not all the mechanics seem fair while playing online, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's fairly safe to say that this is the best Battlefield game yet. 9 out of 10 gamers pick up a Battlefield game for the multiplayer, so I won't bore you with going over the other stuff. First, let's crack straight into the multiplayer. That's what you're here for, that's what you want to hear about. So, before, Battlefield's massive open warfare felt great, but this time around it feels even better. It just feels so real. We all know by now that everything you see during a multiplayer match is because of a player somewhere else on the map. If your chum gets shot down by some stray sniper bullet, that's someone on the other end of the map. Or if there's mortar shells coming out of the sky, creating craters in the ground for you to hide in, hopefully they won't hit the same place twice, eh? And so on and so forth. You've got aircraft zipping around in the air. As I say, a lot of us know what to expect from a Battlefield game. Even if you played Star Wars Battlefront, you should have some rough idea of what to expect in terms of the multiplayer mechanics here. And it goes without saying as well that the immersion levels in Battlefield 1 are like nothing I've ever experienced. It really does suck you in. Every little detail of combat, of war, has really been crammed into the multiplayer here, and it really adds player investment into every single match that you play. And it's this really high level of immersion that makes the game so damn fun to play when going online. But what it also does, it actually encourages a stronger sense of teamwork. There aren't many online shooters out there as frantic as this, that encourage each and every player to take their time and work together as a team, because frankly if they don't, then they're going to lose the match. And I for one am always going to be coming back to the online multiplayer on Battlefield 1. Well, maybe always is a little bit of an overstatement, but say if I don't play the game for months on end, I do feel strongly that I will end up coming back to it, because there will be no multiplayer for quite some time that quite stands up to this level of immersion, this level of realism and consistency from match to match. But what about the mechanics of the online multiplayer? We know that in the past, especially with Battlefield 4, that EA DICE have had some trouble with their servers. I'm happy to say that's all over and done with now. It never really happened with Battlefield 1. I picked it up on day one, I had no issues from the get-go, and I haven't had any issues since. Connecting to matches is simply really easy. But what about the in-game mechanics here? Well, the classes Assault, Support, Medic and Scout are still here, each with their own benefits. But usually those benefits involve specific skills to those classes that encourages you to play as a team, that encourage you to work together. And there are so few other shooters out there that put these kinds of mechanics to use, making the players take the game seriously, that Battlefield 1 really stands out with its teamwork ethic, and playing each match is all the more rewarding for it. When it comes to customization, there's actually not very much going on there. There's only really an average of 4 or 5 distinct weapons per type. And while this may have some players feeling a little bit powerless to modify things on the fly suiting the situation, each of the weapons serve a specific purpose, specific to different situations depending on their handling. You've got some machine guns that deal great amounts of damage very quickly, but they also have very shoddy range. Using sniper rifles requires a good understanding of bullet drop and target leading physics, and other weapons just kick like a mule. So you have to be very careful in what you choose, depending on different situations, but as a result, there's no one weapon that feels too overpowered or unfair, and fighting your enemy on the ground as a result doesn't feel unfair in itself, which makes you feel like you're playing a good, leveled, online, well thought out experience. Despite everything that I've discussed so far, however, it's pretty much impossible to create a perfect online multiplayer experience. There are just so many different little things going on that it would be, as I say, almost impossible for a developer to create a sequence of events for you to take part in that would constantly feel fair. So as a result, there are a couple of bits and bobs with Battlefield 1's multiplayer that can tend to feel frustrating or unfair. For example, on smaller map modes like Domination or Team Deathmatch, the spawn system goes a little bit squiffy. And the new mode, Operations, is absolutely fantastic, don't get me wrong, it feels like a culmination of what the Battlefield team has always wanted to do. It's based on real historical skirmishes, one team defends while the other attacks, pushing across different lines of the map to gain the ultimate territory. It gives a good sense of the ebb and flow of real battles, although there's one little issue with this. If the attackers fail in their last but one push, then they'll get reinforced with something big. When I say something big, I mean dependent on the map, it could be an armoured train, a zeppelin, or a dreadnought, and if players find themselves on the receiving end of these horrible things, the game can start to feel a little bit unfair. When this series of events goes down, 9 times out of 10 the attackers will win. These massive handicaps take an absolute beating from your team to take them down, and even if the whole team works together to get rid of them, then the attackers will have had the advantage of the fact that you've all been rushing around trying to blow this thing up, and they'll be taking your territory from you while you're trying to do it. It just lessens the odds of winning as defense even further. So perhaps it would be a good idea if EA DICE released a patch where these artillery lobbing behemoths take a little bit less punishment. It would still be a fair fight. And I briefly mentioned smaller maps earlier on, game modes like Domination and Team Deathmatch. And this comes with its own problems. The issue is Battlefield 1's ambition tends to come back around to bite it in the ass. The mechanics for multiplayer in this game are engineered to appease the larger audience, the people who really want to play the larger, chaotic maps that Battlefield is so famous for. So when all of the mechanics designed for that end up condensed down into smaller maps, the issue that you have is mainly with spawning. No matter where you choose to spawn, no matter how clever you try to be about your drop-in location, you could well end up spawning into a big cloud of gas, or right under a mortar rocket, or in some crossfire somewhere, starting you off with maybe half health if you're lucky enough to survive, but most of the time you won't be, and you'll just die. And when this happens several times in a row, yes, it gets very frustrating indeed. So as I said earlier on, impossible to create a perfect multiplayer experience, and in Battlefield's case, this bit is the perfect example of that. When BS like this goes down, Battlefield 1's near-perfect multiplayer system can start to feel a little bit jaded, but these instances are fairly few and far between, thankfully. It's only a minor issue, and Battlefield 1 remains my favourite online shooter to date, and that's a bold claim. The maps are great, and the carnage is even better. But what about the game's campaign? Well, the only real historical character in Battlefield 1's campaign is Lawrence of Arabia. The campaign and its characters actually surprised me. I got more than I thought I was going to get in terms of character depth. It starts off with a very punchy battle in no man's land, and the game brazenly informs you that it does not expect you to survive, and you won't, no matter how hard you try. So what this is actually a brilliantly told wave survival. It zips from one area of the horrible battlefield to the next, depending on when you die. It's very brutal, and it's a very vivid portrayal of the messy, horrific nature of early 20th century war. When the player completes all of the war stories that the game has to offer, the developers have still shown respect, with a video titled Dedicated to Those Who Served. So when I got started with the first war story, I was pleasantly surprised with how it was told. I felt like I was getting into a game spliced with the blunt realism of Saving Private Ryan, and instantly it establishes itself as a campaign made by those who have done their homework on World War I. Even characters who die very shortly into the campaign are somehow humanised very effectively. You find yourself invested in them very quickly. I'm not quite sure how they managed to do this. Perhaps it was just the extremely high quality of the cutscenes. The characters that the players will inhabit throughout the different war stories actually feel like real people, unfortunate, resentful victims of conscription. But sadly, all of this is almost wasted because each of their stories tend to come a little bit short. Players can expect to finish each character and their war story in around an hour, and this was a big shame, as the Battlefield 1 team blatantly have new writers, and they're certainly upping their storytelling game. Just when you feel like you're hitting your stride with a certain character, their story will be over, and then next up, the players are placed in the boots of a newly unfamiliar character. Despite this, the total 5 hours, or around that amount of time for the campaign, lackluster as it may be in length, was actually very, very high in quality. So as a result, the campaign was still great fun to play. Each character's story focuses on different things. One of them places you into a tank team trying desperately to survive behind enemy lines, another a roguish American pilot taking to the skies. My personal favourite was playing as a female Bedouin badass under the orders of a very well-spoken Lawrence of Arabia. Her story allows you to play around with the excellently implemented stealth mechanics. And this is another thing that surprised me about Battlefield 1. The stealth mechanics are actually very solid, and in actual fact it makes me wonder if we should expect a solid stealth title from EA DICE in the very near future. So I don't want to go on for too long and take up too much of your time, guys, so I'm going to wrap things up now. Battlefield 1 deservedly stands atop a very large hill, looking down on other shooters as they scramble over one another vying for that top position. It's earned this position with photorealistic graphics and excellent multiplayer mechanics. Its campaign is still feeling a little lackluster akin to previous titles, but it is evident that EA DICE are stepping up their game in that area. Of course, there is an ongoing debate about the morality of romanticising war contrasted with its sheer grittiness, but the same could be said of any other historical shooter we've had so far. I don't really see why Battlefield 1 should take more or less flack, as I said earlier on, than any other shooter. So I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10. I did come across a few graphical glitches both online and during the campaign. One soldier's cape decided to go for a little fly around as it hovered over the battlefield. A crater forms under an AA gun only for it to stay exactly where it was, suspended above the newly made hole in the ground. Regardless, I'm going to be coming back to Battlefield 1 for some time to come, blowing my whistle, bayonet charging my way through the battlefield and questioning design choices from time to time. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Do whatever you want to do. I'll see you guys on the next video for all things PlayStation 4. Peace.